All right. Well, I've already had one request for some of your secrets, Dave, and I told Mayor Deister that I would tell him privately after the meeting on Twitter. So it shouldn't. We'll keep it just between us. Thank you so much for the invitation to come speak to you today on behalf of U.S. EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy, and also, I really do want to recognize the leadership here. In addition to Dave, Mayor Chulin, outgoing, Mayor Couder, incoming, and Mayor Rouleau, your kind words before. You all have full-time jobs, running cities, running municipalities, and so your leadership in an organization like the Cities Initiative matters. It matters a lot. And you're going to hear a little bit about this from me in just a few minutes, some of the details about why it matters so much. I think the Great Lakes are the benefit, and the St. Lawrence are the beneficiaries of all the great work that you have done. And Mayor Deister, thank you so much for hosting today in the history lesson. I can think of a few professors at the Boston University that I would have loved to have you as a history professor given that very quick, very sharp presentation. You know, it's exciting to be here. I know Judith Enck, our regional administrator in our New York office, was just here less than a month ago to announce about $2 million worth of Brownfields program funds to help remediate some abandoned and contaminated sites in Niagara County and some of the other jurisdictions. So I know along with the governor, there's a great deal of attention being given to upstate New York, including this particular region, which is very, very important. I remember standing on the shores of Lake Michigan 13 years ago with Dave and Mayor Daley when the announcement to establish the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative was made. And at that time, the rallying cry of this group was, "We want a seat at the table." But in those 13 years, you have gone a very long way, not just to having a seat at the table, but to actually setting the table. In a lot of ways, you're going to hear about this. And this is a very special time to come speak. I first spoke to I think the second time I spoke to your group was 6 years ago after my appointment first came through. And now, 6 years later, with 218 days left in the administration, but who's counting? It's a good time to sit here with each other and to talk a little bit about some of the accomplishments that we've seen over the past few years with the cities. But I also do want to talk about what is ahead. Your time is precious. I know you've got things to do. You want to know what needs to get done as mayors. And so I'm going to close with a list of things that I think we need to do together in order to lock in some of the amazing, incredible accomplishments for and with cities over the past 6 years. But I'll give you a fair warning here. This list is not going to be an easy list to try to execute. But that's why I wanted to come speak to you today, because I know if there's one thing about mayors, they are not shy and afraid of tough battles. So if anybody can pull off this list with us, I think you can. First of all, let's talk a little bit about the past. We heard some great history just moments ago about the area. And I want to talk just for a minute or two about some of our recent history together, because it matters. And these are the accomplishments we want to try to lock in. In 2012, the U.S. and Canadian governments signed a renewed, revitalized Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. This is the policy that the two federal governments use to coordinate work with one another and make commitments on Great Lakes water quality. And at that time, or before that time, this is the first time in 25 years that this document, this policy had been revitalized. Before that time, there was mention of states, provinces, perhaps some other jurisdictions, but never before had cities been acknowledged in this agreement. That changed in 2012, just a few years ago with this administration. Now, cities, municipalities in particular, are specifically mentioned in this policy. And that is because I think you had a receptive audience in both federal governments, but it's also because of your leadership in insisting that you have that seat at the table as equal partners in the kinds of decisions that need to be made around the Great Lakes and part of the St. Lawrence. You did that. And I think you need to recognize that. You've accomplished this in the past few years. It's a real testament to the kinds of work that this organization and municipalities are doing, seeing their role around the Great Lakes and the river. Let me also talk about the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. This is the largest Great Lakes-only investment in U.S. history that we've made to help restore and protect these magnificent water bodies. You know, under it, we've recognized that cities have a special place. We've created a Shoreline Cities Initiative, not to be confused with the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative. This is a funding mechanism that we have used under the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative to recognize that cities have perhaps as much upside potential as any to help restore the Great Lakes. And under this Shoreline Cities Initiative, cities have been the beneficiary of federal funds to the tune of some $33 million. That's not chump change. That's significant. This has happened on and because of your watch. But it's not just a matter of cities having received funding under this program. Cities are also helping to lead where this program goes into the future. We have a Great Lakes Advisory Board comprised of some of the most talented, diverse people I have ever worked with in my 30 years of doing Great Lakes work. And with Dave as chair of that Great Lakes Advisory Board, our 11 federal departments, this is the EPA, this is the White House Council on Environmental Quality, this is the Department of Interior, the Corps of Engineers, U.S. Department of Agriculture, the list goes on. We have received incredible, amazing advice to help guide the investments under the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative into the future through 2019. That has happened because of your leadership. And then, I know the list could go on of accomplishments, but I want to also mention areas of concern. You know these places. There are working harbors and rivers all around the Great Lakes and the river itself that have been beleaguered by decades of legacy pollutants from former industrial sites that have been, some of which have now been taken off the list. They are no longer areas of concern. Mayor Barrett and Mayor Vandersteen of Milwaukee and Sheboygan in particular strike me as leaders, people who have been more persistent than the persistent toxics that they have wanted to clean up to get areas of concern off the list progressively and get these cities back on the grid so that they're contributing again to the local economies all around the region. We are knocking these places off the list. We're restoring them. We're cleaning them up. And we intend to do more as we keep going forward, thanks to the investments that we have. I could go on all day about accomplishments. That's not why you're here. You want to know what it is we need to do to keep going, to keep that momentum going so that we can lock in the accomplishments like those that I've just mentioned over the past several years, keep them going into the future, especially with a change of administration. So let's talk about that. And let's start with areas of concern. AOCs. You know these places. We've got 30, 40 some around all of the Great Lakes in the U.S. and Canada. But as we clean them up and as we delist them, for example, we're in one right now in Niagara. We have one in Buffalo. We're making progress in both of these places. Much more progress than I think many of us would have imagined just a few years ago. We need to turn them from areas of concern to areas of care. We need to make sure that our former areas of concern, once they are taken off the list, never go back onto that list. That cannot happen. It can't happen. And I'm really impressed that in places like, for example, White Lake, a small, unassuming area of concern on the eastern shore of Lake Michigan and West Michigan, residents of Whitehall and Montague, for example, have created a sustainability committee. They don't want to lose the momentum of having their public advisory committee to get White Lake off the cleanup list. They've wanted to go further into the future to keep making those cities and that lake much more sustainable into the future. We have to keep that momentum going that we have now created together over the past several years. On invasive species, how do we keep silver, bighead, and black carp out of the Great Lakes? This is quickly becoming one of the most expensive, but hopefully one of the most successful exercises in preventing invasive species from entering the Great Lakes in North American history. The reason is because of the binational efforts of the Asian Carp Regional Coordinating Committee, among many other efforts. This committee is comprised of 24 agencies, federal on both sides of the border, state and provincial, and municipal agencies that are coordinating together, they're identifying challenges early, and working to make sure that they address those challenges early. We had a great victory just last month where we took one of the highest risk pathways to the Great Lakes, the Wabash River in Indiana, can sometimes flood at its headwaters and reach over into the Maumee River, going into Lake Erie through Ohio. We have now sealed off that conduit. There's now a berm that averages some 7.5 feet tall that will keep Asian carp from reaching Lake Erie from that vector. But here's the thing. This committee does not have any statutory or policy standing. It simply exists because we brought these agencies together to deal with an imminent threat. As a change in administration occurs, we have to revisit that. We have to make sure that this Asian Carp Regional Coordinating Committee continues to exist. Without it, we will lose a very important defense network against this invasive species. And we do have mechanical defenses in place, such as the Corps of Engineers' electric fences along the Chicago area waterway system. But my admonition to all of us as we change administrations is that biological approaches and biological fixes and prevention measures are just as important, even perhaps more important than our mechanical approaches. We need to make sure we shore those up. Let's talk about drinking water infrastructure. We could have a week-long conference on this and still only scratch the surface. I know it's something that's on your minds, as it is the administrators every day. But reinventing and reinvesting in our infrastructure is as much of a public policy imperative as national security, just because public health and public safety are twin exigencies. In the U.S. alone, we drink more than 1 billion glasses of water per day. In a Gallup poll this spring, when people were asked about environmental concerns, pollution of drinking water, rivers, and lakes were top concerns, even above climate change, even above air pollution, toxics, nuclear contamination, and others. Drinking water. And no doubt lead has refocused public attention. I know we're going to hear some about this very soon. Public attention sharply on drinking water, and EPA is looking to update its lead and copper rule next year. And in the meantime, other jurisdictions are taking action, which we applaud. EPA data show that at least $384 billion of improvements through the year 2030 are needed to maintain, upgrade, and replace thousands of miles of pipes, thousands of miles of thousands of treatment plants, storage tanks, and water distribution systems. Of the top 10 states that have the greatest infrastructure reinvestment needs, 5 of those states are Great Lakes states, as Administrator McCarthy mentioned just a few months ago in Washington at a meeting of the Great Lakes Commission. But we can't hope to keep up with investment needs. Here's my to-do list item. We can't keep up with investment needs if all we're going to do is renew old technology and approaches. We have to innovate to find more cost-effective approaches, such as green infrastructure, that will help make that nearly $400 billion price tag much more palatable. Toxic algae is another thing on the list. We have a lot of work still to do on this. Much of what you as mayors have to deal with is what is sent downstream to you and at you. Nowhere else is this truer than when it comes to upstream agricultural runoff, which puts downstream drinking water at risk. More investment is needed for green agristructure, that is, revegetating upstream areas to use nature to improve downstream water quality. If we can have green infrastructure in our cities, surely we can have green agristructure in our rural areas. And we're increasingly looking to invest federal funds in this way. I've been really impressed by some of the thinking that's gone on, for example, at New Water, Green Bay's water utility, to keep reaching upstream, as a downstream utility, to keep reaching upstream to try to work to invest in upstream measures that can help continuing to protect those downstream interests. Forecasting is another thing that is absolutely vital to all of us. You know, one lesson that we keep learning in this region, and we keep learning it the hard way, unfortunately, is that it takes years, if not decades, to first identify a problem, years, if not decades, to identify a possible solution to that problem, years, if not decades, to actually implement that solution. And then there's even, I could go on, there's even more time that it takes to go back to see if your solution has taken effect, see if you need to adjust and do more, things like that. We can't keep operating this way in this region. The time it takes from beginning to end in this progression is simply too long. Because cities are often the first responders to many problems, we need the tools in place to help municipalities be the first to know what they must address proactively with their state, provincial, federal, and other partners. On the federal level, we are intensifying our efforts to develop just those tools to forecast threats long before they manifest themselves so that cities and others can help address them ahead of time. And then the final thing on my list for today is climate change and making our cities more resilient. As you know, EPA's Clean Power Plan has been stayed in the U.S. Supreme Court. But that's not stopping our progress. We've already moved forward to reduce emissions from trucks and cars. EPA recently issued 3 rules to curb emissions of methane, one of the most serious forms of greenhouse gases, including a new source performance standard that was just issued on June 3rd. We're also putting tools in place to help ensure that our coasts and infrastructure are climate ready, able to withstand extremes and meteorological swings. So we are trying to get the tools in place, and we are not stopping in terms of our progress at the EPA to help with greenhouse gases, to help with the climate change problem. So in conclusion, if you believe, like I do, that in an era of an increasingly thirsty world where clean, fresh water is what will attract jobs and an unparalleled quality of life, then you know we have to keep managing the Great Lakes. We cannot afford to take a hands-off approach. And the city's initiative is helping very much. Mayors, municipalities all around the Great Lakes helping with that management. The trajectory of progress over the past several years has been significant, but far more needs to be done. And as we transition from administration to administration in both countries, I believe our cities, together with our states, our provinces, tribes, First Nations, Métis, and many others, are our best hope to ensure continuity in this trajectory. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for all you are doing to help the Great Lakes economy and the Great Lakes environment and everything that you do. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Cam. Cam has indicated a willingness to take a question or two if there might be one that's pressing out there. Usually the mayors have some pretty tough questions. Too early. Oh, okay. Well, if there are no questions, Cam really is not only my friend, he is a friend of the cities. He has bent over backwards to make sure that cities have seats at every table that he has some opportunity to set up and set. And, you know, his reference to agristructure, green agristructure, as I looked out at the audience and Mayor Jim Ginn and Mayor Steve Arnold, I don't know if we have any others who have farms. I had a chance to visit Mayor Ginn's farm up in central Huron, and some of the wonderful things that are being done out in the fields on the Ontario side, we could learn a little bit on the U.S. side on some of these practices. So They are practicing what they preach. So again, join me in thanking Cam Davis.